My name is Rebecca Elaine Carter. I'm 32 years old, and I'll never forget standing in my parents' living room, staring at the glossy ivory wedding invitation addressed to my sister, but with my name intentionally missing from the guest list. You might think I'm exaggerating or that it was a misunderstanding, but no. My parents, my own mother and father, excluded me from my younger sister Rachel's wedding, and when I confronted them, they told me, word for word, "It's better this way, Rebecca. You don't fit the image we want for the family." That sentence tore into me like broken glass, because it wasn't just rejection, it was rejection with the rehearsed justification. That moment changed the trajectory of my life, and I promise you, everything that followed would shock the world. Before I continue, if you're here listening, I need you with me. Don't forget to subscribe or follow so you never miss these real-life stories that cut deep and uncover the truth behind smiling family photos. When I was born, my parents looked at me with mild interest. But when my sister Rachel came 3 years later, it was like they had found the golden child. Rachel was blonde like mom, charming like dad, and extroverted in a way that made relatives immediately adore her. By contrast, I had darker hair, quieter tendencies, more academic focus, and a habit of disappearing into books instead of people. I wasn't dramatic or attention-seeking. I didn't charm a room. I didn't squeal, hug, or perform. I observed, understood, and remembered. Rachel always got the attention. Ballet lessons, birthday parties at fancy venues, new dresses for every holiday. I got practical clothes. You don't need more than one pair of good shoes, Rebecca. If Rachel wanted something, she got it. If I asked for something, I heard about budgets and discipline and practicality. But I accepted my role because I thought families were just uneven by nature, that love could still exist beneath favoritism. As teens, our differences turned into distance. Rachel dated football players. I edited the school literary journal. Rachel was a cheerleader. I entered essay competitions. Rachel chased applause. I chased purpose. And whenever relatives visited, they asked about her. How's our little superstar? Did Rachel get a lead role yet? Is Rachel still modeling? She's so photogenic. And when it came to me, they'd simply ask, Rebecca, you doing well in school? I would say yes. They would say, good, good, and then turn back to Rachel. But I didn't hate her. I truly didn't. I even loved her. I defended her, I helped her with homework, I lent her clothes, I comforted her when a boyfriend cheated on her. I was her quiet harbor, the kind of sister who might not shine next to her, but always held steady. Yet, looking back, I now see the cracks forming. It wasn't just Rachel being favored, it was Rachel being weaponized against me, as if her existence justified my inferiority. I moved to Chicago in my 20s to work in marketing, and I built a life outside the family's orbit. I made friends, I dated, I experienced heartbreak, I advanced in my career, and I began to shine in my own quiet, grounded way. I even started therapy at 27, something Rachel called dramatic, and my mother claimed was weak-minded. But therapy taught me something vital. I was not defective. I was different. It also helped me see the emotional favoritism of my family with fresh clarity. So, when Rachel announced her engagement, a lavish white rose-themed ceremony, I expected at the very least that I would be a bridesmaid, maybe even maid of honor. After all, I was her sister. I was family, blood. But I didn't even get an invitation. Not accidentally, intentionally. When the wedding invitations were mailed, one went to my parents, one to various cousins, one to friends, but none to me. At first, I thought maybe Rachel was planning to give mine in person. Maybe it was a surprise. Maybe it was an oversight. So I called her. She didn't pick up. I texted her, "Hey, did my invite get lost? Just checking." She read it and didn't reply. That's when I called my mother. And she didn't cushion anything. She didn't soften it. She didn't wrap it in excuse or apology. She said, "Rebecca, your presence might affect the aesthetic of the wedding. It's going to be elegant and polished. Rachel wants a refined, picture-perfect guest list." I felt the blood leave my face. What does that mean? And she answered, "You're not visually aligned with the theme, and Rachel doesn't want you overshadowing her or clashing with her chosen aesthetic." I thought I misheard. Overshadowing? Me? The quiet one? Clashing with a theme? My presence was so unwelcome, so problematic that excluding me was easier than including me. I asked, shaky, "Is that what Rachel said?" Mom sighed. "It's what we all agreed on." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. That night, I sat on my couch, lights off, staring at the city skyline through the window, as tears burned silently down my face. It wasn't just being excluded. It was being erased. I thought of every childhood moment when I helped Rachel shine. I thought of every time I stepped aside so she could be centered. I thought of every time I played the supportive role. And now, they didn't even want me in the building. But here's the thing. Life is long, and time has a way of turning tables. What I didn't know in that moment was that this rejection, this humiliation, this emotional exile would eventually become the seed of the greatest reversal I would ever experience. Because 2 years later, I would be the one getting married. And my guest list wouldn't just be invited, it'd be celebrated. My story would spread online like wildfire, reaching millions. I would expose the truth, but not in anger, in reclamation. And my parents and sister, they would finally face what they had done. But I'm getting ahead of myself. After Rachel's wedding, which I didn't attend, the family posted photos all over Facebook and Instagram. Rachel in lace, Rachel smiling with bridesmaids, Rachel cutting her cake, Rachel being toasted by parents. And every post felt like a punch. Because weddings aren't just celebrations, they're public declarations of belonging. And I was conspicuously absent. I didn't comment, I didn't like, I didn't engage. Silence became my dignity. Rachel didn't reach out. My father sent a single text. "Hope you understand it was for the best." I didn't reply. Instead, I poured myself into work. I got promoted. I moved into a nicer apartment. I rekindled my social life. I met new people at mixers, workshops, charity events. And that's where I met Ethan Jameson. Ethan was nothing like the flamboyant men Rachel dated or the reserved, emotionally distant men I had previously chosen. He was genuine, thoughtful, quietly confident. He paid attention. He listened. He respected me. He didn't want to outshine me or silence me. He wanted to understand me. We dated seriously. We fell in love. And as our relationship deepened, I told him everything. The favoritism, the exclusion, the emotional invisibility. And he said to me, "Rebecca, you don't need to fight for their acceptance. You deserve love that doesn't require begging for acknowledgement." That sentence changed me. A year later, Ethan proposed, and I said yes. That's when things got interesting. Because unlike Rachel's wedding, mine wouldn't be a polished, exclusive, image-obsessed event. Mine would be authentic, meaningful, a celebration of connection. And something happened during the planning process. Something that no one, especially my family, expected. But before we get there, I need you to really envision this. Me, at 32, grounded, growing, healing, standing at the brink of creating a life where I didn't have to be overshadowed, erased, or censored. I posted the date of my engagement online, just casually, not expecting much. But what I didn't know was that my story, the sister excluded from the wedding, had quietly reached more people than I ever realized. Because behind the scenes, friends had told friends, colleagues had repeated the story, and strangers had shared it among themselves as an example of familial cruelty. And soon, people began reaching out, not just to congratulate me, but to express solidarity. I was the black sheep too. My sister was the favorite, I was invisible. My family excluded me from major milestones. I know your pain, and I'm glad you found happiness. And then someone made a post on a relationship forum telling my story, with identifying details anonymized. That post went viral. And suddenly, the world wanted to see the woman who was cast out now creating her own celebration. And then came the moment, the shift, the turning point. When the wedding invitations were sent out, my guest list didn't just spread through friends and relatives, it spread across continents. People were requesting to attend, not because they knew me personally, but because they resonated with the story. They felt represented by me. They felt spoken for through me. It became symbolic, a gathering not just of friends, but of survivors of family marginalization. Meanwhile, my family, they were shocked. They couldn't understand why my wedding was gaining more attention than Rachel's, why people cared, why strangers were flying in from Canada, England, Australia, just to witness it. And my mother called me, voice quivering, and said, "Rebecca, are we invited to your wedding?" And I smiled. A slow, quiet, private smile, and answered. I took a slow, steady breath when my mother asked, "Are we invited to your wedding?" Because it wasn't a simple yes or no question. It wasn't about seating charts. It was about history. It was about every moment I had been overlooked, every subtle dismissal, every weaponized preference. And it was also about who I had become, a woman who no longer needed their approval to feel valid. But still, I didn't answer immediately. I said very gently, "We'll talk about it." Then I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, feeling the presence of every childhood memory crowding in around me. Because I needed to go back, mentally, to the origin of the wound, to understand why this moment felt so monumental, and why their requests pressed deep into something old and aching. See, growing up in Oakdale, a quiet suburban town where lawns were trimmed and reputations were manicured, our family presented itself as refined, successful, polished. My father was strict in a traditional way, believing that daughters were reflections of the family brand. And my mother, she cared more about appearances than authenticity. She was the kind of woman who ironed napkins for dinner parties and chose outfits based on how they photographed rather than how they felt. Rachel fit into that world without effort. She sparkled, she posed, she charmed. I was more introspective. I spent afternoons writing short stories, drawing little maps of imaginary towns, or sitting quietly under the oak tree journaling my thoughts instead of gossiping with neighbors. And in our household, Rachel's brightness made my quietness look like dullness. People assumed that because she spoke more, she mattered more. Because she smiled widely, her feelings ran deeper. Because she fit their expectations, she deserved their investment. I remember once, around age 14, when Rachel was preparing for a school pageant and Mom was fussing over her, curling her hair, applying lip gloss, finishing touches on a dress she'd bought just for the occasion. I walked into the room in an old hoodie, excited to show my mother a story I had won first place for in an academic contest. But before I could say a word, my mother raised a hand and said, "Not now, Rebecca. Can't you see this is important?" And that sentence, even though it wasn't intended to be cruel, lodged itself deep inside me. Because it told me everything. Rachel's moment was important, my moment was interruptive. And that framework, that hierarchy, shaped our teenage years and then our 20s. Back in the present, after my mother's call, I spoke with Ethan about it. He listened with that calm steadiness I loved him for. "It's not about whether they come," he said, voice warm. "It's about whether you want them there. Not out of obligation, but out of choice." I nodded, but inside, something uncertain flickered. Because part of me still longed for something, maybe not their approval, but their acknowledgement. The chance for them to finally see me, not as a shadow beside Rachel, but as myself. As the wedding planning continued, each detail felt like a reclamation. Instead of pristine ivory cards printed in calligraphy like Rachel's invitations, ours were printed on textured, recycled paper with simple, elegant wording. Instead of a curated ivory and gold guest list, we welcomed diversity. Friends who were outspoken, friends who were introverted, friends who were artistic, friends who were quirky. Instead of obsessing over appearances, we cared about atmosphere, warmth, sincerity, connection. And then something unexpected happened. Our photographer, Mira, proposed something bold. What if your wedding isn't just in person? What if it's shared with the online community that emotionally stood by you? People who saw your story, people who resonated could be part of it too. I blinked at her. Live streamed? Not exactly, she said. Something more interactive. Let your story be witnessed by those who lived similar pain. I thought about it, and slowly it felt right. Meanwhile, Rachel began to notice the growing attention around my engagement through social media. She reached out to me one night, for the first time in months. "Hey sis," she messaged on Facebook. "Congratulations on the engagement. Looks like it'll be a pretty big event." I stared at the text, uneasy. Her message wasn't warm, it wasn't apologetic, it was curious, and maybe a little threatened. I wrote back, "Thank you," and left it at that. A week later, she called me. "So, what's the hype? Why are complete strangers interested in your wedding?" Her tone wasn't mean, but it wasn't kind either. It was incredulous, like I was doing something abnormal or attention-seeking. "It's not hype," I said. "People connected to my story." And Rachel's silence stretched. Then with a brittle laugh, she said, "Oh, come on. Don't tell me you're still milking that whole 'I was excluded' thing." My heart tightened. "That whole excluded thing?" I repeated slowly. She chuckled again. "Rebecca, you know how Mom is, and you would have looked out of sync with the theme. It wasn't personal." I let that hang there. "Not personal," I said softly. She shifted. "Look, you've gotten over it, right? We were just trying to make the wedding as elegant as possible." I felt something sharpen inside me. "Rachel, do you remember how I cried when you didn't invite me? Do you remember how it felt to look at pictures of your wedding and see that every person in our family was there, except me?" Rachel didn't answer, just the quiet exhale. Days later, I received a message from my father, a formal, almost corporate-sounding text. "My mother and I would like to attend your wedding. Please confirm our inclusion on your guest list at earliest convenience. I stared at it for a long moment. Not, we want to be part of your special day. Not, we regret how we treated you. Not, we love you. Just a request for confirmation, like a business RSVP. I didn't answer that night. Instead, I revisited old memories in my mind. Memories of when I was 19 and broke my wrist slipping on ice. Rachel was at a holiday party. My parents stayed with her. They told me, "You'll be fine on your own. You're tough." Memories of when I got my first major career award at 28, and they didn't attend the ceremony because Rachel had a brunch they didn't want her to arrive alone to. Memories of times I cooked dinner for them when they visited Chicago, while Rachel arrived late and got praised for simply showing up. Families don't have to be perfect, but they should be loving. And I finally saw with clarity, they never saw me. The real turning point came when Ethan's family dynamics entered the picture. His mother, Mary Ann, a warm, compassionate former school teacher, called me one evening just to chat. "Rebecca, I want you to know, the moment you enter this family, you're one of us. Not because of formality or obligation, but because we truly want you here." I felt tears sting my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. And she said something that stayed with me. Families of origin don't always see us, but families of choice, friendships, partnerships, these are the families that build us. As the wedding date approached, requests from strangers to attend multiplied. Some were heartfelt stories. My family never accepted me. My sister was always the favorite, too. I know what it's like to be invincible. Some even said, "Your wedding feels like a victory for all of us who were treated as lesser." We couldn't physically host thousands, of course, but many asked if they could simply observe, support, witness. So we built a digital attendance system, not a live stream of the ceremony, but a shared platform where people could post messages, poems, blessings, encouragements. Suddenly, my wedding became more than personal. It became communal. And then the confrontation moment arrived. My parents decided to fly into Chicago a week early and asked to meet me at a quiet, upscale restaurant. I arrived with Ethan beside me. My mother was wearing pearl earrings, intention around her eyes. My father sat stiffly, like he was preparing for a negotiation. Rachel was there too. Mother smiled too brightly. "Rebecca," she said, reaching to touch my hand, "we're so happy for you, and we're glad this whole thing got big. Attention is attention, after all." My stomach twisted. Then Rachel leaned in, eyebrows slightly raised. "But I have to ask, are you sure you want random online people tied to your wedding? It's kind of tacky." That word, tacky. I had been called not photogenic, not fitting the theme, but this felt like an open insult. For the first time in my life, I didn't swallow it. Instead, I said, "Better tacky and loved than elegant and excluded." Silence. Thick. Heavy. My mother blinked. Rachel stared. My father stiffened. Then he said, "Are we or are we not invited to your wedding?" I looked at them, really looked. And then I said, voice steady, "You are invited as guests, just guests, not VIPs, not family of honor. You will sit in the audience like everyone else, because at this wedding, love is not ranked. People are not valued by aesthetic, and no one will be excluded for image." Rachel's eyes widened. "You're serious?" I nodded. And then, the twist. My father clenched his jaw and said, "If we are not seated as family, then we won't come at all." And I felt something inside me, Something that had always curled and apologized, stand up straight. Then don't come, I said simply. My mother gasped. Rachel muttered, "You're unbelievable." Father said, "This is disrespectful." But Ethan turned to them and said softly, "No, this is Rebecca having boundaries." And I realized I didn't need them to attend. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their blessing. I wasn't a shadow anymore. I was the author of my own story. They left the restaurant in silence, and as they walked away, I felt like I was finally stepping into my own life. But what happened next, just days before the wedding, shocked even me. A piece of information surfaced, a truth that rewrote everything I thought I knew about Rachel, about my parents, and about why I was excluded from that wedding 2 years ago. A truth that would change everything. The truth came from an unexpected source, and I remember exactly where I was when it reached me. I was in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with ribbons and craft papers spread around me as I assembled small gift packets for wedding guests. Ethan was at his desk handling vendor payments. Our apartment was warm, quiet, lit by a late afternoon amber glow. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at it. The name flashed. Aunt Meredith. My father's younger sister, the outsider of the family, the one who had always been a bit eccentric and too honest for social comfort. She rarely contacted me. I answered with mild surprise. "Hello?" Her voice was low, serious, almost urgent. "Rebecca, honey, I think you deserve to know the truth." My pulse shifted. The truth about what? She exhaled slowly, like someone who held something heavy for too long. About why you weren't invited to Rachel's wedding. My breathing slowed, because up until that moment, I believed I knew why. Favoritism, shallow image control, aesthetic exclusion. But something in Aunt Meredith's tone told me this was bigger. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. She said, "Rebecca, your parents weren't trying to prevent you from ruining the theme. They were protecting Rachel's secrets. Secrets that would have come out if you had been there." My mind immediately raced to possibilities. Pregnancy cover-up, affair, debt, legal issue, but none matched the intensity of her voice. "I don't understand." She continued, "Rebecca, 2 years before Rachel's wedding, you told your parents something in confidence, something private, something that shook them. Do you remember?" My mind searched. 2 years before, I had confided in many things, but I couldn't recall something major. I'm not sure." Then she said, "It wasn't about you. It was about what you witnessed." And suddenly, like a light turning on in a sealed room, I remembered. It was a memory I had tucked away. Yes, I remembered being at the family lake house. I had accidentally overheard Rachel in an argument with someone on the phone. Her voice was harsh, frantic. "I don't care. You can't just show up. He can never know. If anyone finds out, everything will fall apart." I had stepped back silently, confused. Later that night, I asked her about it, gently, and she snapped at me, "Mind your own business." I had told my parents the next day, concerned. They brushed it off, saying Rachel was just stressed, and I forgot about it. But now Aunt Meredith's voice dropped to a whisper. "Rebecca, your sister didn't want you at that wedding because you were the only one who had seen her with the other man, the man she was with while she was already engaged." My lips parted. "What?" She continued, "Your parents found out, and they covered it up. They didn't want any risk of that wedding becoming messy. You were unpredictable, not because you're emotional, but because you're honest." I sat frozen. My voice came out soft. "You're saying Rachel cheated on her fiancé before the wedding? More than once, Aunt Meredith said grimly. And the worst part? Your parents chose to protect Rachel's image instead of honoring your integrity. I felt both shock and something else, validation, because suddenly everything made sense. My exclusion wasn't due to lack of aesthetic. It wasn't due to my personality. It wasn't due to my quietness. It was because I accidentally held a truth they feared I might reveal. Ethan watched my face and frowned with concern. I put the phone on speaker. Aunt Meredith, did Rachel know I overheard that call? A pause. Yes, she knew. She panicked. She told your mother that you might accidentally gossip, and that was enough for them to cut you out. But I wasn't a gossip. I never said anything. I would never have sabotaged her day. Yet they assumed I would, because I wasn't controllable like Rachel, because I wasn't predictable, because I wasn't their image asset. And then Aunt Meredith said something I wasn't prepared for. Rebecca, your mother resents that you inherited your grandmother's morality. She wanted daughters who supported the family narrative, not daughters who told uncomfortable truths. It hit me hard. My grandmother, her mother, had been a fiercely honest woman, a woman who challenged appearances and insisted on authenticity, a woman my mother always considered difficult. I swallowed. Aunt Meredith, why are you telling me this now? She answered, because they're about to show up to your wedding with the same attitude they had at Rachel's, entitled, controlling, false. And you deserve to know exactly what you are freeing yourself from. When the call ended, I sat very still. Ethan came over, sat beside me, and gently put his hand on mine. How are you feeling? I didn't answer immediately because I didn't know whether I felt devastated or relieved. Finally, I whispered, I wasn't excluded because I was lesser. I was excluded because I was truthful. Ethan nodded slowly. Your integrity intimidated them. And suddenly, it wasn't just pain. It was clarity and power. The next day, I confronted Rachel. I called her. She answered with forced lightness. Hey, bride-to-be. I didn't bother with small talk. I know about the affair. Silence. Dead silence. Then a stiff inhale. She stammered, Rebecca, I don't know what... I cut gently but firmly. I know you were seeing someone else while engaged. I know Mom and Dad covered it up, and you thought I might expose it, which is why I wasn't invited. The silence on the line thickened like wet cement. When Rachel spoke again, her voice trembled, not with guilt, but with anger. Who told you that? Not, I'm sorry. Not, let me explain. Not, yes, it's true. She was already in defense mode. It doesn't matter who, I said. It matters that it happened. She tried again. You don't understand. Things were complicated. No, I said, voice steady. You were scared that I would accidentally mention something. You saw me as a threat, not as family. Then came the phrase that showed her true heart. You could have ruined everything, Rebecca. And that hurt. Not because of the accusation, but because it revealed how she truly saw me. I never said a word. I reminded her. I could have, but I didn't. Because despite everything, I wanted you to be happy." Rachel's voice cracked. For one moment, just one, I thought I heard a real vulnerability. But instead, she asked desperately, "Are you going to tell your online followers? Are you going to publicize this?" And that was her fear. Not conscious, not regret, reputation. "No," I replied. "Your marriage and your choices are your business. I'm not here to destroy anything." Then my voice softened, not with weakness, but with clarity. "I'm just done carrying the penalty for your secrets." Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she quietly hung up. Later that evening, my mother called. Her voice was sharp. "Rebecca, how dare you dig into your sister's private matters? You have no right." And for the first time in my life, I interrupted her. I didn't dig. I remembered. She sputtered. "If this gets out, if this spreads online." "It won't. Because I'm not cruel. But I'm also not compliant anymore." Then she dropped the real truth, the one she never intended to say out loud. "That wedding was about our family's reputation. You would have complicated things." And there it was. Plain, naked truth. I would have complicated things. Not I would have ruined them. Not I would have lied. Simply, my presence would have introduced risk. Risk of truth. Risk of authenticity. Risk of unpredictability. Ethan listened from across the room, not intruding, but absorbing. And I understood something profound. In a family where the highest value is image, truth is treated as threat. 2 days before the wedding, something extraordinary happened that I never could have predicted. Some of the digital guests, people from around the world who had emotionally followed my journey, began posting messages not of pity or anger or vengeance, but celebration, not of Rachel's mistakes, but of my resilience. One message said, "Your wedding isn't just an event, it's a reclamation of worth." Another, "You are creating a space where authenticity outranks appearances." And then one that made me cry. "Many of us were invisible daughters. This wedding makes us visible again." I realized my pain had become something bigger than me. It had become a mirror for countless others. That night, as I stood in the bathroom, brushing my hair before bed, I looked at my reflection. Really looked. Soft brown eyes, high cheekbones, a subtle steadiness in my expression I didn't have years ago. I whispered to myself, "You were never the shadow." That night, I slept peacefully. But peace wasn't the final word. The next morning, the day before the wedding, I received an email from someone I never expected. The man Rachel had been seeing. His name was Daniel Reed, former coworker. The subject line read, "I think you should know." My heart thudded. I opened it, and as I read his words, my jaw slowly dropped, because what he revealed wasn't about Rachel's past. It was about my parents, their allegiance, their manipulation, their willingness to rewrite narratives, and a terrifying motive behind the favoritism that went far deeper than personality or preference. What he wrote rewrote everything I thought I understood about my family, everything I thought I understood about Rachel, everything I thought I understood about myself. And when I finished reading his message, my hands were shaking. I remember that morning vividly. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, but I barely noticed it. My hands still trembled from Daniel Reed's email. He revealed that my parents had actively concealed Rachel's infidelities, not just to protect her wedding, but to maintain their social image. He provided dates, messages, and proof of their manipulation, showing how they even coached Rachel on what to say if I ever questioned her actions. The betrayal was staggering. My parents, the people who should have nurtured me, had spent years prioritizing appearances over truth, rewarding deception while punishing honesty. And yet, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wedding, my wedding, would be the first time I would step fully into my own power, not as a shadow of my family, but as the author of my own story. Ethan sensed my tension. He wrapped his arms around me from behind as I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down my ivory wedding dress. Whatever happens today, it doesn't define you. You define yourself. I exhaled slowly and nodded. For the first time, I truly believed it. The ceremony was set in a charming urban loft in Chicago, a place that combined elegance with authenticity. Twinkling lights hung from exposed beams, and a soft floral scent mingled with the city air. Guests arrived in a stream of warm smiles and heartfelt greetings. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers from across the globe who had followed my story joined us digitally or in person. Each person brought a unique energy, a story, a presence that validated the years I had spent feeling unseen. And yet, in the back of my mind, I couldn't forget that my parents and Rachel had insisted on attending or threatened to walk away if they weren't given special treatment. When the doors opened, my father and mother appeared first. They were dressed impeccably, her pearls catching the morning light, him in a crisp navy suit. Rachel trailed behind, perfectly coiffed, eyes scanning the room with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. I stood at the altar, holding Ethan's hands, feeling a strange sense of serenity. Their gaze met mine. They wanted acknowledgement, control, maybe even apology, but I was done performing for them. The ceremony began, and as I walked down the aisle, I noticed something extraordinary. The guests were smiling, cheering, waving. There was no hierarchy here, no favoritism, no preferential treatment, just pure celebration of love and truth. I could feel the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. I whispered to Ethan, "This is everything I've ever needed." During the vows, I spoke from the heart, but also from a place of deep reflection on my journey. I promised to honor truth, to protect authenticity, to create a life where love is not contingent on image or appearances. I promised to choose connection over approval and courage over fear. Ethan's eyes shimmered with emotion, and in that moment I realized the magnitude of what we had built together, a sanctuary of honesty where the past's betrayals could not dictate our present or future. But then came the confrontation. Halfway through the ceremony, my mother leaned close to my father and whispered something sharp. I couldn't hear the words, but their intensity sent a ripple of tension across the room. Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line, her expression darkening. And then, as I finished my vows, she did something I never expected. She stood up, cleared her throat, and addressed the room. "Rebecca, I know we've had our differences, and I wanted to say something." The room went silent. My heart thumped. Rachel's voice wavered, but there was an edge, a mixture of guilt, defensiveness, and maybe even fear. She knows. I know I've made mistakes, and maybe I hurt you in ways I didn't understand. But today isn't about the past. It's about happiness. She paused, and I realized she was trying to reclaim control, to make this moment about her, even in my wedding. But then, unexpectedly, she stumbled. Her hands trembled. A phone buzzed in her clutch, a digital notification from a mutual friend, a post referencing Daniel Reed's revelations. She read it, her eyes widening, and then she froze. In that instant, the mask she wore for years slipped. For the first time, everyone saw the panic and shame she had carried beneath her polished exterior. And the room, silent, attentive, empathetic, witnessed it. I felt a surge of liberation. Not vindictiveness, not malice, just power, control. I realized that the years of exclusion, the betrayals, the favoritism, none of it could touch me anymore because I had chosen myself. I had built my own circle, my own life, my own truth. After the ceremony, during the reception, something even more remarkable happened. Guests, including those who had followed my story online, shared their own experiences of being marginalized, excluded, or misunderstood. The room was alive with storytelling, laughter, tears, and mutual understanding. And in the middle of it all, Ethan held my hand tightly, whispering, "Look around. This is real. This is ours. And they can't take it from you." My parents and Rachel remained at their table, tense and isolated, unable to integrate into the warmth that surrounded us. I realized, with clarity and compassion, that they were trapped by their own choices, their own values, not by anything I had done. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity, not for their pain, but for their inability to see beyond their need for control and image. The wedding night ended with fireworks over the Chicago skyline. I stood on the balcony, wrapped in Ethan's arms, watching colors explode across the dark sky. I felt complete, whole, not just because I had married the love of my life, but because I had finally reclaimed my story, my power, and my peace. In the weeks that followed, boundaries became key. My parents and Rachel reached out sporadically, but I maintained clarity. They could exist in my life, but only on terms that respected my autonomy. I also began therapy again, this time with a renewed focus on family dynamics, healing from long-term favoritism, and understanding the power of boundaries. I share this story not to celebrate vengeance, but to highlight resilience. Life doesn't always give us validation from the people who should love us unconditionally. Sometimes we must create our own family, our own circle, and our own sanctuary of authenticity. And sometimes the people who hurt us the most reveal, unintentionally, the depth of our own strength. Rebecca Elaine Carter, 32 years old, once excluded and silenced, now stands free. Free to celebrate love, truth, and authenticity. Free to build a life without fear of favoritism or control. Free to choose herself. And that freedom is, in the end, more powerful than any exclusion or betrayal. So here's my question to you. Have you ever been excluded by those who were supposed to love you unconditionally? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? How did you reclaim your power? Share your story in the comments because your voice matters and your story could inspire someone else to finally choose themselves.